Welcome, everybody. Thank you for joining us in person and online. I see we have some guests still popping in onto our webinar, so thank you very much. Welcome to one of our SSI GIS Day events, a discussion with our esteemed panelists who we're going to let introduce themselves because we cannot do them justice on our own. So we will go ahead and let them introduce themselves in just 1 second. So a few things. This is a webinar for those that are online. If you have a question, there should be a chat or a Q&A button that you can go ahead and type your question in. Dr. Swift is also online just across the hall from us here, monitoring that. And those in the room, you'll also have a chance to ask some questions at the end of the panel. So just to let you know about that, those that are online, sadly, we won't get to see your faces at the end, but we appreciate your attendance. Those that are live and in person, feel free to stick around for an in-person mapping event afterwards. And we do have some snacks in the room, and there will be some more food coming later on as well. So without further ado, so this is our GIS Day event from SSI, put together with a couple of our faculty clusters, so and reaching out to a variety of expertise to cover the role of GeoAI in global politics. So we're going to go ahead and get underway. On my screen, and I think everybody might have the same view, I don't know if we just want to go left to right with our intros, and so that our esteemed panelists can do a brief introduction before we get into some questions that we have crowdsourced from faculty to lead the discussion. But again, if anybody has questions or comments that you'd like to ask, just let us know. So I'm going to go ahead. Gisli, do you want to go ahead and get started? You're on the left on my screen. I don't know. I'm assuming everyone's
Sure. I can do that. Do you want me to? I was just looking at the instructions before the panel. Do you want to talk about the examples of our work at our company, or do that later?
If you want to provide a couple of that in your introduction, that would be okay.
Okay.
We have,
Sure.
we do have about 5 minutes-ish each for each of you to introduce yourselves and kind of how you fit into the discussion of the role of GeoAI in global politics.
Yeah, and please feel free to share your screen if you want to.
Yeah.
Sounds good. Thank you. My name is Gisli Paulsen. I'm VP of Data Science at a company called 3 Gimbals. I've been doing geoinformatics for about 15 years, beginning in civil engineering, then transitioning to archaeology, later demographics, and finally national security roughly 3 years ago. I finished my PhD 5 years ago. Before then, my last academic post was as assistant professor at the University of Bergen, Norway. Right now, given that I'm in national security, there's a bit of sensitivity about the current work that we do, but I'll say as much as I can. We're a small firm specializing in providing unclassified shareable insights for the intelligence community. And GeoInt, geospatial intelligence, has always been a core component of what we do, ranging from computer vision, spatial modeling, spatial information extraction from unstructured data, to designing spatial knowledge graphs for AI applications. So some of the stuff we've done across all major ports in the Southcom AOR, we ran a project called Pisces, which was a continuous CV application processing daily planet imagery to detect vessels in those ports. That process was complemented by analysis of RF, AIS, CTD, i.e. radio frequency, vessel data, automated information system data from vessels, CTD, which is cell phone data, and other data sources, which we then fused to really bring a much better pattern of life understanding of vessels, as well as any kind of other, kind of handheld devices associated with those vessels. We also maintained a global social media monitoring campaign, extracting spatial information from reports of drug interdictions on vessels, powered by a place name ontology based on NGA's GeoName database, but expanded to include multilingual unofficial names for places of interest. Another example, we use real-time RF data from our data partners to build a regional GPS interference model, regional GPS interference models, which we use, among other things, to generate safe corridor flight paths for unmanned aerial systems. And the final one I'll talk about is we've built several chatbots and other generative AI systems tuned to provide insights retrieved from large data lakes. Particularly relevant to GeoAI, we found that vector databases storing embeddings from unstructured or tabular data to be very ineffective. And what we've instead been doing over the past year or so is using knowledge graphs, labeled property graphs, found it in a data model based on the highly spatial Cytox theorem ontology. I don't know if everyone's familiar with that one, so I'll just copy that image because it really informs a lot of the ways in which I think we can make AI systems perform better. I'll paste that in chat in a minute. What that allows us to do is to have a much more effective way to ensure that complex spatial relationships are accurately represented in the vector embeddings powering our generative AI systems. So yeah, thank you. Nice to meet you all. Over to the next one.
Thank you so much. Chris, go ahead.
Great, thank you, appreciate it. I will share on my screen here. Hopefully you guys can see it. I'll proceed as if you can see it. My name is Chris Weideman. I've been in GIS for about 12 years and in actually AI since before that. I first got into machine learning back in 2011, where we were building some optimization models for the federal government. And not long after that, got into GIS, where my first real into GeoAI was using some machine learning to extract location data from social media sources. It was a great fun project. Obviously, AI has transitioned a lot over the last handful of years, and we've built a business around assisting companies implementing AI. So as an individual, I've been in technology for over 20 years, building software for over 20 years. And a lot of our business is built around the idea of automating processes or people. A lot of that today, for the last handful of years, has really exclusively used AI and specifically machine learning. So when you talk about what we do as a business, it's everything from building custom AI models to building custom software, integrating those two pieces together to build process automation, or intelligent automation as now many call it, integrating those services with business systems. So think of your CRM or your ERP systems that are out there, those systems that run your business. And then we also provide a lot of technical consulting and just advice to our customers. When you look at what does that look like, there's a lot of examples. I tried to pick a few that had some location relevance, and a great example of how we can use these tools in our day-to-day is in health and safety. We built a great tool for a construction company that allows the health and safety manager to walk their construction sites. And as they're walking the construction site, they're recording what they're seeing, having a conversation with their phone effectively. And then when they're done, they upload that video to their system, which then the system begins to extract information from the video, the transcription. It's doing named entity recognition to find location, the equipment that's on site. And ultimately, it's building a site inspection report, which then allows the health and safety team to generate these reports that are effectively required to continue construction in a very efficient and effective way. This also helps them really start to get into analyzing the information that they have and doing a lot more with traditional health and safety, and frankly, in a much more effective way. But this isn't just a problem for construction. Most industries have very many processes or automation needs that frankly are enabled by both location and AI. Credit unions are another great example. We've done a lot of great things for credit unions. One of an interesting tool uses location and language data that we extract from member data at the customer side on the credit unions to help assign them the correct customer service response roles, meaning that if someone's calling in from a neighborhood in a specific part of the United States that may have a way of speaking that's different than other call centers, will assign the members to the area that they'll have people that they're familiar with the language style. Yeah, I think we can skip through a lot of this. Back to where we were on the credit union side, a lot of great tools are generated here. Again, opportunities to use location information, but also machine learning and these general large language models as well. A lot of great opportunities there. And I'm glad we got this screen share to happen just at the end of my introduction. Thanks for the help.
Thank you, Chris. Sorry about that. Steve, go ahead. Well, last but not least, in the intros.
Hey y'all, so Steve Fleming, currently adjunct faculty at USC, spent a number of years out there with the team at Spatial Sciences Institute doing GeoAI work. So my storyline, I'm an old soldier, essentially what I am. I did 30 years active duty military service in the United States Army, working as a kind of a combat arms officer, a consumer, if you will, of all the geospatial intelligence that was being built between 1985 and basically 2010. And then on the back end of my military career, I was involved in with one of the agencies that does intel collection. So in this case, NGA, National Geospatial Intelligence Agency, and work with them closely as we were kind of working through all the issues of conflict that we were involved in both Iraq and Afghanistan. As part of all that, I had a chance to serve at the United States Military Academy with a .edu, so similar to what we see at USC, a teaching institution, where I was essentially trying to translate what I was learning and doing in and around the Intel community space into education. And that was if you will, the springboard out to University of Southern California when I completed my military career in 2015. All that said, I in some days I was a consumer of GeoInt. There are other days that I was a builder of GeoInt when I was doing R&D, research and development for the military. And then some days I was teaching it or training it. And so I had kind of these different experiences that I learned in the military. And what I did see through all of that was the development of AI as it became something that was more and more a thing. And obviously today it's a thing. I'll say this at the outset. Many have asked me my opinions of AI. Is it really artificial or is it something different? And I'm like, well, I would really prefer it to be augmented intelligence versus artificial intelligence, because what we're doing is we're asking a really, really, really smart and fast idiot called a computer to do the work of humans that we are telling it what to do. So this idea of an algorithm is an opinion in ones and zeros. And we are the ones that develop it and essentially have all the biases and everything that come with it. And building it as a tool to help us make decisions. So let's never kind of miss the mark here and let the machine do the work for us. We can have the machine help us do the work. So I really prefer the idea that it's augmented intelligence. And in that, those that are building these systems, looking at the world through different lenses. So the unclassified lens, which we do routinely in this, I think, conversation today, but then there is the classified lens that you look through, which is a different set of data, a different set of tools, a different large learning model that you're dealing with that's helping you make decisions. And so I'll maybe stop my part of the conversation. And my experiences have shown me that that AI is extremely powerful, recognizing that we know the limitations of the AI that we're using to assist us in making the decisions. And so in the national security space, whether we're talking about the Southcom, AOR, and so let's get away from, I guess, all the acronyms. So this is Southern Command area of responsibility. So what that includes, because we heard that term earlier, it's essentially everything south of Mexico, and it includes the Caribbean, but it's essentially all of Central and South America, including the Caribbean. And the United States is proper is considered with Canada Northern Command, and then there are all these different regional commands around the world. So whether we want to talk Indo-Pacific or Europe or Africa, Each one of them deals with a different set of AI challenges. And a lot of it has to do the language model that they're using based upon many things, to include languages, literally languages, and how those languages are being interpreted by, in this case, the machine. As good as it is, we need to obviously proceed with tremendous caution when we're thinking about how to use it in response to national security issues. It's not just like, how do we get to the grocery store and pick the best thing that we're putting in the basket tonight? And so I think it's important to have this conversation today about the uses of AI for national security.
Great, thank you so much for those wonderful introductions. I think that each of you actually touched on something that we were kind of discussing right before we started here, and that is actually to provide, we like to throw around, we being the general public, we like to throw around AI and GeoAI, especially today on GIS Day. And so, although not one of our prepared questions, something that you each touched on in your own way. Steve, you mentioned it being, you like to think of it more as augmented intelligence as opposed to automated. And Gisli, you also mentioned it, if whoever wants to kind of go in the foray first of, could you provide our very broad audience here, because we have undergraduates, we have graduate students, we might have some general public that have joined our webinar. How would you define GeoAI? I don't know who wants to go first. Should I pick one? Yes, pick one. All right, I'm gonna give Steve a break, and also because you decided to kind of lead off with the augmented intelligence. So I'm gonna go back to our beginning, our first panelist here. Gisli, kind of a broader definition of GeoAI, because you also brought up the term first.
I brought up the term because it's in the title of the panel. I honestly do
and
not
you brought
use
in the
it.
geo aspect as well. You did bring in the geography
Correct.
aspect of the vector data, so that's good.
I try to be a little bit prepared. Thanks. I was a little bit apprehensive starting, because I presumed that there was a large academic discourse using that term that I have not been following, given that I'm now in industry. But of course, AI is obviously much broader than generative AI. It involves machine learning, unsupervised learning, supervised learning, all kinds of clustering, all kinds of just mathematical models that are trying to get to some sort of efficient classification task or what have you, methods that have been around for decades. If we had been talking, if this panel had been happening 10 or 20 years ago, it probably would have been all about computer vision, right? Now, given the pivots, the recent pivots in AI, we're generative AI is probably top of mind for a lot of us. And so what I tried to, my approach to GeoAI was kind of thinking, what are these recent, very explosive developments in LLMs? How does that relate to GI science, and kind of what's the overlap there between GIS and AI? And to me, you could talk about this all day, like I said, because we're talking about machine learning approaches. There are a lot of post-GIS tools that have been kind of there natively, part of that solution for years and years that would certainly fall within GeoAI. But like I said, we're not talking about this in 2014, we're talking about this in 2024, which is why I'm curious to know people's thoughts about, some kind of foundational questions about GIS and how that relates to generative AI, especially when it comes to data storage, data retrieval, how RAG or retrieval augmented generation systems handle spatial information. What is the, kind of where are we going with the kind of the way we think about spatial data and the way these systems are being developed, which is why I talked about knowledge graphs as kind of an interesting angle into that, which is an interesting thing, given that a lot of current AI systems are based on vector databases, and that's sort of like a very there's a very big difference between those two ways of thinking of the underlying data that is then being retrieved or even used to train AI models. So it was a bit of a roundabout way to say GeoAI can be anything, just like people use the word AI for all kinds of different things. But I do like Stephen's point that when we're trying to think about how this applies to effective quality research, it's all about human machine teaming, right? It's not about thinking of autonomous systems or automating without reference to or anchoring in human expertise. So especially in national security, how are we building systems that augment our analysts as opposed to replace them? And that's where human machine teaming comes in, which at this point is obviously a necessity given the scale and rapidity of just data generation. Anyway, that was my 2 cents. Over.
Thank you. Chris or Steve, do you have anything else to add to that, or building off of that? You kind of started to mention it. Something that we would want to mention are the challenges to GeoAI, which you were mentioning with the large language models, and that Steve mentioned even just with different languages then being incorporated into these LLMs. So if Chris or Steve, maybe you want to think about some of the challenges that might be facing in utilizing or building, working with GeoAI.
Yeah, I think to kind of just first state, I agree. GeoAI is not a term that I use frequently because in my opinion, GIS is actually one of the probably most progressive uses of machine learning 10, 12 years ago, which machine learning is effectively a segment of artificial intelligence. We didn't really call it that at the time, but I have much of my understanding of machine learning comes from the use cases that I had in geospatial intelligence. So I think the term of GeoAI itself is a little bit of probably a nomenclature or branding exercise, but in many ways it's, how do we apply these same artificial intelligence, machine learning techniques to data that has some spatial element, which is challenging. We spend a lot of time in enterprises and businesses, and those businesses have a hard time using anything besides a large language model in their business. Trying to create custom models using their business data is not a simple task. It is not something that is cheap or easy. And so when you then apply that to spatial data as well, it's especially complex. But if we talk about maybe some of the limitations or considerations in AI and in GeoAI, I think you first have to talk about really data quality and data issues as a whole. We see that across all of our projects. Our number one consideration anytime we're engaging with a new customer is first to evaluate their data source and see if it's even appropriate to begin using it in any type of AI application. And as we all know, with some reference to GIS, GIS is the same way. Without quality data, you have poor outputs. And I think this is only amplified even more when we start using it in an artificial intelligence way, when we're trying to build upon just the idea of spatial reference and instead augment or create some form of new information using pick any one of these computer uses with our spatial data. The other side that I think a lot of people maybe hear about but don't completely understand is the computational constructs that are there. There is a lot of compute that goes into doing AI in the right way. And that's not for us to use necessarily end output of ChatGPT or Claude or Gemini or whatever we want to call AI and the tools we use today. But to get to that point, and then to have an application that's running these models takes a lot of compute, so much more than we have today. There's effectively a scarcity of compute in many ways, and when you have a scarcity of compute, you also have a scarcity of energy. And so there's a lot of constraints that go into not only the things we deal with today, but I expect how as an industry we will have to evolve over the coming years to overcome those constraints. And, either by reducing the compute, reducing the energy costs, finding ways to augment the data so that it has quality and can be used. But there certainly are many challenges that we face as we're trying to build new tools, new information, use AI and machine learning in new ways. And I would classify those as kind of the top 3 challenges.
Thank you. Oh. Lisa, did you want to interject before Steve goes in there, or was that a default hand raise?
No, maybe just if you don't mind, Steve, since I totally agree with the compute issues, and it's why exploring small language models, which can then be optimized for spatial awareness, I think are a very good way forward. I can't remember exactly the numbers, but people have been testing just how much of these huge LLMs is actually being used for certain tasks, and it's a fraction. So you can talk about all the parameters, and you might have less than 1% of all those parameters that have been tuned at a cost of millions and millions and millions of dollars, which are rarely being kind of leveraged for certain task completions. So a lot of people are looking at SLMs as a better method for more kind of limited tasks, but especially when it comes to business applications and other sort of types of applications where it's a clear, where the kind of approach is very clear. Using the general language model every time is not going to be the most effective way forward every time. Sorry, over to you.
No, I think it's super important that you made that comment. So I guess my thinking is you had asked the question GeoAI, and Reader's Digest version of the definition. Maybe the fusion of AI, whether we use the term artificial or augmented intelligence, with things like spatial data, science, geospatial technologies, in order to increase an understanding and solve spatial problems. I like to think of, so I use the word fusion, pretty hot thing if you like food. So all the foodies in the room will nod their head on this one. So this idea of fusion cuisine, taking one version of a type of food and then fusing it with another version and then creating something new from that. That takes a lot of work and effort in order to make it right, because sometimes they don't go well together. I think of the folks in this process that create the recipe as the one that's designing the algorithm, figuring out how to fuse things well and bring things together using AI tools and understanding, as kind of introduced here by the panel members, different components that are really important. So whether we're talking spatial data and data science, or how maybe a certain algorithm works with a large language model or a small language model, there's someone that's going to design the recipe. And then there's going to be the one that prepares the food, which would be the consumer, if you will. So in the world that I have grown up in, one person may go out and collect the data and do some of the analysis on it, and someone else is going to create the products and the recommendation to the decision maker. And they have 2 different roles in doing that, but both have to understand what each is doing in order for it to work. And back to the concept of scale, it's one thing to build a fusion meal for a small dinner table, and then something very, very different to build it for a banquet. And so the idea of starting small and preparing a meal small using a small language model, understanding what the recipe needs to be, and then testing against the person that's going to prepare it at small scale and ensuring it can scale in order to meet the banquet, is to me a kind of a good metaphor about how this is all kind of unfolding in front of us. When I think of the workforce today and then in the future, we're certainly not about replacing the workforce. We're making the workforce better. But what that means is the workforce has to be talented differently. So the folks that are building the algorithms have to understand what the person that's going to use the algorithm is going to use it for, and vice versa. And that takes a huge lift in order to get that right. We might be changing roles, having analysts do more work in creating the algorithms, and then other analysts learning exactly how to use that tool in order to create a product. But it's certainly not workforce reduction. It's making a better, brighter, more purposeful workforce through the use of the tool. And I love the word teaming. It's machine, human teaming. Probably better said, if we're putting things first that need to be first, human machine teaming, first things first.
I like that. And you definitely led right into the next question, are very specific examples that we would be interested, I think some of our students especially be interested in hearing about how each of you might envision your solutions or the algorithms or the human machine team, the role, however you want to define it, being utilized in addressing a variety of global challenges. We have folks that are interested in quite a few things in the room and online, and so it could be a range from climate change, disaster preparedness, peacekeeping, security challenges. So how would you kind of envision the role of a solution, or GeoAI as we have very broadly defined it, in addressing those global challenges?
I can go first there. In my opinion, I think a lot to what Scott is saying is true, that AI allows us, it augments us, but it allows individuals to do more. The way I like to explain that is that I've had this same role a few times now. And before, call it 5 years ago, I had a lot of support around me in my role. I had business analysts, I had researchers, I had architects, I had a lot of people that fulfilled very specific roles, roles that I understood, enough to make sure that things were being done correctly, but I didn't understand enough to maybe do it myself, and I certainly didn't have enough time to do it myself. And today, that team, that support is much smaller, very much so that it's effectively a handful of systems that are the support. And I think that same thing applies to a lot of people moving forward. And when we talk about that in a world atmosphere, or changing the world, or geopolitics, I think it allows people that are, subject matter experts in areas to do more with the same use of their time. It allows us to be more productive. It allows us to be more impactful, because now, instead of us having to ask a researcher to go figure out the statistics behind some data we received, it's something we can sit down and do pretty quickly ourselves, have confidence in the output, and then move quickly through the series of thoughts or processes that we have around that. I do think that this will mean that there is a reduction in workforce in some jobs and responsibilities, but in general, it will allow us all to do more with less. And I do think that applies to, NGOs and the intelligence community and people out there just trying to do more with less in their community. Whether it's building a simple website to help with the homeless problem, or maybe it's building an NGO to go solve world hunger. With AI and large language models in general, these people that are inspired, that have the inspiration, the time, the commitment, will be facilitated to do more with what they have.
I think that part there, being inspired and being able to do more with what we have. Would either of our other two panelists like to take a stab at that as well? Build on that some more? Chris, you hit it out of the park there.
Sure. Yeah, I can say a couple of things on, kind of following on the same lines. The easy answer to how do we leverage, or how is GeoAI going to help us address these challenges, is just scale. It's so common to understand, you have some project, there's an investigation, there's a data collection, data review that has to happen, and just the scale of the incoming data means it's cost prohibitive or even possible to do the work by human labor alone. So what we try to do always is automate and scale up what our analysts do while retaining the strengths derived from their subject matter expertise. So when it comes to large language models, you can use features like fine-tuning agents and RAG to start building explicit prompts. So for instance, if it is about doing natural language processing, which in many ways is probably going to be the most common task in this kind of human machine teaming efforts to just monitor global media, chatter, social media, et cetera. It's processing huge amounts of text. But you cannot just say, you know, we're looking for drugs, here's a bunch of tweets, have at it, OpenAI API, model, you know, GPT-4 or whatever. That's not enough. But what you can do is say, okay, do we have a narcotics expert in-house, or can we contract or get in touch with someone who can tell us what are the words, right? What are the situations? What are the common kind of smuggling methods right now that are kind of most commonly being employed? And you build out and essentially fine-tune your model by saying, here is all of our expertise on top of what your general knowledge base is. These are the kind of words we want to be monitoring, and essentially you kind of add an ontology of your own on top of what you can use by using the sort of commercial APIs out there. So that's where I think you really sort of focus in on augmentation and just helping your analysts automate the boring stuff, so that the sort of rule, you know, the sort of prompt workflow that is based on their own subject matter expertise can be used to process way more text than they could ever go through, and then they essentially sit downstream of that to verify the results, go back, fine tune, you know, whatever that is. But that's kind of how I see the general approach to how GeoAI is going to start helping us, regardless of what the actual use case is.
Great, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm gonna actually throw a little bit more at all of you in this next one, and kind of building. We're still building on this. We do have a question that popped up. Okay, we're gonna keep track of that, Stephen, and we'll come back to it. I think it might actually be answered along the way as well. You know, part of what you all have talked about is also being able to see patterns, and you know, especially with the example you were just giving, right? Using language models and ontologies to find a pattern, and what we can see, and where these patterns are occurring as well. One thing that we often cover and broadly in almost every subject and every class is correlation does not equal causation. And that's a really big part of what we also want to kind of try and get at eventually, are causes of certain, especially interactions and relationships between especially humans and the environment. So then kind of building off of that, the question that we have is sort of, do you think that we might be able to, or, you know, I say can we, but how might we better leverage AI in general, or GeoAI, for sort of a causal effect? If you think that we would be able to leverage any sort of these analytics and these solutions to further examine causal effects, as opposed to simply the trends that we see, or if we can or cannot.
I guess I can start with that, and I'm going to go back to the previous set of answers that were given and try to connect a few dots. So, you know, there's the 6 big questions that we often ask before we make a decision, and those are the who, what, why, where, when, and how. And what the AI, I think, if used properly, is allowing us to do is to get to causation quicker by answering some of the simpler questions that AI can be really good at, and be quite dependable, that it can give us the answers that we need. And when we think dependable, statistically dependable on what it can give us. And a couple of those that are quite simple, usually for AI to address, are the what it is and where it is. I mean, these are some simple things that AI can do well. Sometimes if you've got a good enough temporal data sets that refreshing often. And so satellites sometimes can do this, but certainly with some of the systems that I'm familiar with and have used, where you have this thing called constant stare, always looking at a certain place at a certain time, the when can also be addressed quite quickly. So you can get through the when, the what, and the where. The who it is sometimes questionable, depending upon what types of sensors you can put on who is doing it. But the really tough questions that humans are really good at answering are the why it's being done. So causality, intentionality, maybe another word. You start hearing terms about misinformation and disinformation. So the difference between those two is intentionality or causation. And then, the last one, if you're really good, you could figure out through backward engineering how it was done. And so it allows us to leverage AI to do some of the simple answers that get to a quicker answer on some of the really hard answers that humans are really good at answering. And those are the last two that I mentioned, which are the why and the how it's being done. Think about some of the analytics that we're using just to get around a city as an example. So you think of descriptive intelligence that describes a place on a road, and I'm just using any version of the map apps that you all are using to travel around. So descriptive intelligence tells us what it is. Predictive intelligence tells us what it likely will do to us. And the key thing here on when it becomes efficient is when we get a prescription. So prescriptive intelligence telling us what to do next to make our lives more efficient, change the route as an example, versus staying on the route that likely will be slower because of something that happened. So, getting to that point and having the ability to get there, I think is going to be where AI assists us. And it's very good right now at the first two, I think, identifying what and where something is occurring. TBD on how well we use it to answer the last two, the why and the how.
Thank you. Chris or Gisli, either, would you like to also have a moment to reflect on that part of it as well?
I don't think that we're there yet to be able to do causal, at least in the way I think you're talking about it. A lot of what we have today in AI is models that regurgitate really the language that we have spoken over the last 20 years. And it's an understanding of language and really the math behind what word comes next. So taking, looking at a deforestation problem and asking AI to understand what caused that is not something that AI does right now. Now, I do think that changes over the next handful of years, maybe even the next 5, but I don't think we're there yet.
Okay. All right, so I'm gonna kind of to the question of, before we move on to the next part, the last bit here, kind of thinking about, and we've touched on it a little bit here, how we might consider intelligence gathering. And like I said, we've touched on it a little bit in terms of the language models, having the in-house knowledge experts, but so specifically, how can we further utilize a solution to transform how we, the US or other governments, local or larger governments, would be gathering and interpreting different and therefore ultimately acting on the intelligence that is available? Or is this something that we can't really talk about because it is too security sensitive?
I mean, I think we can say high level that it's a very complex topic that requires a lot of many models to deduce the information into a product of answers. So there are things out there that that have a lot of use case in intelligence where you can effectively use it like a large language model where you're asking it questions about a location and it will provide not only a written response, but also give you location information and maybe even imagery sources to, show you what's going on the ground. But those are very, very complex systems, most of which I think are too costly for most, I would even say, governments to run. Certainly the biggest governments in the world will have these tools. But I think when we talk about changing the world, kind of bringing us back to the very beginning here, we've got to get the cost and the compute of all of this to come down so that the smallest countries in the world can use these same tools, that they can have access to the form of intelligence that we get to use today. So I think it is a full circle conversation of this has to progress, this has to evolve to where this becomes, instead of this kind of multimodal, large scale model that's being used in intelligence right now, to something that's much more capable and accessible to all.
Great, thanks. Go ahead.
Yeah, what I thought of was a little bit what Chris showed us earlier on that health and safety project he was working with. And I'm thinking of, I don't know if you guys have heard of Processes Group. You can think of collection as you're collecting raw signals, raw information, and that will be delivered maybe in some sort of an enhanced or kind of cooked form to analysts. But what I'm seeing more and more in GeoInt is having that kind of situational understanding almost directly in the collection process, where that gets kind of contextualized and maybe sort of formed into the kinds of reports that decision makers are used to seeing right away. So in which Processes Groups, for instance, tries to build these situational understanding semantic data models where if you are collecting information on the ground, let's say in a hostile environment, rather than just getting a bunch of signals, you would get an action plan, right? So you can kind of train you can build semantic data models, fine-tune an AI system to help you get essentially a kind of a response handbook or a set of guidelines immediately upon collection, as opposed to just gathering raw data that you then work with. And that sounds a little bit like what Chris was doing, where if you have sensors on a building site, rather than just getting some segmentation back, some identification, you might actually just get a kind of health and safety report or some sort of alert saying, wait, this looks like an accident about to happen or whatever. So to me, when I heard the question, I kind of thought of that in terms of, again, dealing with scale rather than trying to build bigger and bigger systems, collecting more and more data. We essentially try to sort of funnel that data into insights or into sort of structured action plans immediately. And I would, if you ever have a chance to talk to the people at Processes, they do some very interesting stuff. And I just put the link in there, and you can see some of their services that sort of aim to try and achieve that.
Yeah, I'll add a little more. I think those are obviously very good points that both have made. I think I'll add in, because there's a great question out here that talks about commercial systems, specifically something, say, from a company like Tesla, and some of their technologies and how they're using it from the commercial side and how it's benefiting governments. I just finished a talk a few hours ago here in Georgia with some students that are doing GIS Day, where I'm currently at, about what I talk about the government-sponsored geocaching, how it's been done for a number of years, where the government was in charge of it. And really in the last 20 years, we've seen a little bit of a changing of the sides, that we're getting a lot more geocaching or collection done by commercial, which is augmenting government partners, and not just in the United States, but with other states, nation states. The idea of machine team, human machine teaming, what sometimes is missed is that in that conversation, yeah, humans still communicate and work with humans, humans work with machines, and machines work with machines. And so this is something that is becoming more complex as we look at industry, being brought into the discussion where how do you build a machine that's going to team with someone else's machine in order to create a better product for the analyst or for the consumer. So a lot of this actually is going on right now. So you may or may not be familiar with this term called tipping and queuing, where one introduction of intelligence tips you to then go after and cues you to collect something different or go look at something differently through a different lens. So it could be an imint collect that tips you to then use a SIGINT collect to look at the same thing because the imint collect tipped you to do it. What we're now seeing through the uses of AI are machines being tipped to other machines to have that other machine do something where the human's not in the loop, but it builds a more robust data set that helps build out that large language model or the small language model that we're talking about, that I think is becoming extremely powerful, and commercial industry is a big part of this. So you look at some of the big players, we know some of the big names right now, who knows what they're going to be in 10 years. But certainly they're part of that conversation, whereas before they were not part of that conversation. And so the introduction of some of the names that we're starting to see become influential in the United States are, I think, a function of how we're seeing these types of technologies being used in the intelligence world.
Just stepped out for a second, but I think that was the last of the question that I had posed. And so I'm going to actually turn it over to Dr. Jennifer Swift now for a couple of questions. And anybody in the room, start prepping your questions as well. We have just a couple more minutes, maybe with one or two of our panelists. But then if there's also anybody online that has a question, and we will have their contact, you can always find them on LinkedIn as well. So Dr. Swift.
Okay. I have a question. How do you see like AI evolving in the next 5 to 10 years? I know that's a stretch. And its implications for international relations. I think this is a pretty broad question, but we see so much happening now globally, and we're just trying to get a grasp on uses of AI in international relations. So any thoughts that you'd like to share that we haven't touched on yet? Let's start with Chris.
Yeah, I think you have to stay away from some of the fear conversations that I think creep in with talking about AI and even geopolitically over the next 5 or 10 years. And to Steve's point, I think as long as we kind of keep this augmentation where humans are really in control, there's not a whole lot to worry about. But when I think about how AI is going to change, I think back to 12 years ago when I first started to get into machine learning, and I think about how slowly it moved at that point, and frankly, how slowly it moved until, we'll call it 3 years ago. And then I look at how quickly it's moved in the last 3 years. And then I think about what I know is happening now that will be available in 6 months from now. And all I see is a hockey stick. And I do think we have limitations that kind of restrict us in some ways, where we'll probably hockey stick and then level off for a while. But I do think in general, most people are underestimating the power, and we'll call it intelligence, that will be available to most people in, I'll call it 2 or 3 years. I think it'll be pretty amazing in that short amount of time. And then we go from there to, okay, we have this tool, we have this power, but what do we do with it? How does it change our lives? And frankly, I don't think it will change our lives as a group right away. It will change individuals' lives. It will change the way we do our work. It will, all of the things we're seeing. It may change some corporations, but I think it's going to take a lot longer for it to impact the communities and culture. I'm on a team now that's looking at how banks and credit unions will evolve over the next 5 to 10 years. And the whole task or goal is to envision a credit union in 10 years from now. And what is it that a credit union needs to be so that we can build the technology to support that? Because it's going to take not only the evolution of AI, but then it's going to take the whole foundational systems that are built to support that, much like internet. Internet happened, it was there, it was available, but businesses didn't have websites for many years, and businesses didn't have tools that really leveraged the internet for many, many years. So I think there's an impact. I think there's a large impact. I think there's a lot of opportunities, a lot of power that comes from these tools, but I don't think we're going to see a huge global impact for maybe that 10 to 15 year time frame. Does that answer your question?
Yeah, I think I would add that different countries that we're going to work with moving forward, when you think international relations, so relations between countries internationally, we'll just kind of look at that quite broadly, but how that would work. Different countries are going to trust AI differently than other countries. I'm not a big fan of telling war stories. I'll share this one in Afghanistan. When I went to Afghanistan and worked there, we often think of, at least where I grew up in the United States, was you started with 100% trust when I first met you, and all you could do with me was lose trust, but you had 100% when I met you. When I went to Afghanistan, it was the exact opposite. You had no trust, you had to build trust. So these were two polar differences about how trust in individuals worked, and I see similarly how AI is going to work. There will be certain countries that will trust this and use it like we use right now, many of us anyways, like we use banking transactions with our credit cards. I mean, there's a fear, but at the same time, we trust it implicitly, many. I will tell you this, though, there are places in this United States where people still print out their bank statements and keep some cold, hard cash under their mattress. Yeah, that's a different level of trust in the exact same system of finances. So I make a point here when we think about that and think of how AI is going to work internationally. You better know who your partners are and work with those partners who have similar ideas about trusting AI in order to make decisions, or you might find yourself in a tricky spot. And so we have a new version of NATO today than we had 3 years ago as a function of the conflict in Ukraine. And there's a whole bunch of trust networking being done right now as part of that, and AI is part of that conversation. I was at a meeting a month ago in Washington, D.C. that brought together all the armies of, many of the armies of the world at the Association of the United States Army meeting. And it was interesting to hear how that conversation in Europe is currently going on with technology, about how NATO is using technology moving forward with the ground campaign. And AI was part of that conversation, and which countries trusted it more than others. So it's alive and well, and it's going to be, I think, part of how international relationships move forward, about how well AI is received by the countries that are involved in the relationships.
Thank you so much. Gisley, is there?
Thanks. Yeah, I only
Yeah.
have 30 seconds. So I'll just say that as far as the development of AI, I think we'll see a lot of development on the underlying data stores. So what does a spatial embedding look like if we're talking about GeoAI? Are we still looking at these kind of black box embeddings as the core kind of units of storage for a lot of these systems? I think that'll be very different in 5 years. Similarly to Chris's point about the compute cost of these systems, we'll see more and more small language models that are specific to a domain. So domain specific models, I think, will be much, much more common as, again, to Chris's point, companies start to address the data quality issue. What's an effective data lake for a given system? And we probably will see industry standard models for certain sort of knowledge domains. And finally, I think it's, on Steve's points, I think it is interesting to go back to the question, the sort of elephant in the room, if you will, asked by Stephen Titus about Tesla and Starlink and X and all that. I mean, we've already seen Elon Musk make geopolitical decisions about who can access Starlink. I don't know if you know about Crimea and places in Ukraine where essentially cut off from the Ukrainian military because they were using them to guide GPS, UAS. So that's already happening. That's more kind of flipping it around and saying, what are these mega corporations able to do right now to influence and dominate the information space? Of course, it's going to be coming out of the other direction. And we saw 10 years ago, Facebook unintentionally start to really create major spaces of disinformation because of, again, Stephen's kind of trust doctrine, where a lot of people have an implicit trust in certain institutions or technologies or platforms, where a lot of people still look at things at Facebook and take them at face value. There will absolutely be people interacting with language models with misaligned or sort of unknowable intentions, taking them at face value, and then either getting false information or being influenced in some way, either intentionally or just as a matter of drift, given the complexity and sort of lifelike nature of these systems. So anyway, that's my final point. It was great to meet you all. Have a good rest of your day, and hope you have a good end to your conversation.
Gisley, thank you so much. We're honored that you could join our panel. Thank you so much for your time. Thanks. I have a few more questions.
Back to back.
Yeah, and
Steve, I think you're also have a short amount of time with us, or do you have a couple of extra minutes? I can't remember.
oh, you're
Yep.
muted.
Yep.
Yeah.
I've got a few. I have another meeting that starts 3:30 my time, so I have a hard stop here in a few minutes to prepare for that. But I can hang in there for a few more minutes.
I'd like to then I'll direct this to you, the last question, and then we can also open it up again to the questions from the attendees. If a student is interested in getting into this and contributing to this area, what should they do to become involved? What are some of the career trajectories, or so what are the one or two really big takeaways for a student?
Yeah, I think we hit it a little bit earlier. I think you need to be broad in your education in the spaces that are being impacted by what we're talking about here in AI. So it's interesting. Spatial Sciences Institute has created a relationship with an engineering school. So don't know who is in the audience. I think most folks in the audience are folks from USC, but there might be others that aren't. But essentially, the Viterbi School of Engineering, obviously very good in data science and computer science, and we've coupled with them to create a spatial data science program. I like the idea of bringing together different academic disciplines in order to be prepared for the work that you're going to have to do. I would also offer that beyond those two, you need to be getting some work if you're thinking about using it globally in the international relations space. You need to go get some time in the saddle in IR. Go spend some time with the international relations, the political science folks, and understand how these technologies might be used in their places, in their countries. So you have to build your own curriculum in order to be able to do that. I don't think you can be satisfied going to an academic counselor and having them give you all the right courses in order to do it. But I would list those as kind of the top three if you're interested in using this internationally. It'd be data science, and the spatial sciences, and the international relations community would be a good way of approaching how you build your curriculum. You can do that through majors and minors or majors and a certificate, but multiple different ways to skin the cat. But you have to be very thoughtful about how you're going to spend your last 2 years, your junior and senior year in college, in order to get that done. If you're in the grad school space, different animal. I would tell you, if you're going to do a thesis, pick a thesis that brings together those technologies, not just one of them that you're comfortable with, but challenge yourself, get outside the box, and bring those technologies together in order to be able to answer the mail.
Okay, thank you. Chris?
Yeah, I I agree with Steve. I would maybe be a little more conservative and say that data science is probably the academic value of today. A lot of everything else that we're seeing is so new that it's hard to find in academia. So I would encourage people to get into data science. I also encourage people to take maybe 1 or 2 software engineering classes, even if you don't want to be a software engineer. Understanding the basics of software engineering and just how things are constructed is going to be very valuable moving forward. A lot of these tools, with just that basic understanding, you can build some form of software to either help you in your day-to-day or either help you in your career as you understand these systems a little bit better. And then I would say you've got to get the real world experience. I would go find one of these. There's many of great geospatial AI focused companies that are out there, some of which have received a lot of funding, not only from venture capital, but also the federal government. I would be knocking on their doors, seeing how I could participate in what they're doing. Not a plug for a specific company, but Dante AI is one that I've heard a lot of lately, that I know is both getting funding from NGA and is also rich with capital from venture capital. So I would be talking to those types of people and seeing how you can get internships or participate in their research. Generally speaking, you're going to have to do a lot of this on your own and be pretty progressive in your thinking.
Yeah. And I would add one extra thing to that. I concur completely about understanding the engineering and how software engineering works. I would also add, you don't need to be have all the different tricks in the book when it comes to programming languages. A lot of folks seem to try to build this portfolio of all the things they can program in. I was growing up when computers were just getting started, so I learned BASIC, and then I learned Fortran 77, and then I learned Pascal, and then I learned C++. And as I've kind of gone through how I've learned different programming languages, I think you need to be dangerous in one and understand the process of what programmers do, because you're probably going to be asking them to do things for you. And in order to be someone who's using the technology or a leader of someone who's building the technology, you need to spend a little time in the seat. And all I would tell you, you don't need to be, it doesn't need to be a focus of your work, but you probably need to at least do it once, so you know exactly what they do and how they do it. In that, in that space of being a programmer, but not to the point where that's all you do. Not unless you want to be a programmer. If that's what you want to do, you might not be in the right place if you're in the spatial sciences world or the international relations world. But take some time in the seat. Don't run from it.
Great. Thank you very much, you guys. We have a question, or actually, I was wondering if either of you would like to say anything else about Steve Titus's question. How did the panel sees the role of global corporations, such as Starlink, in shaping what's happening internationally?
These companies are the ones that will be shaping AI over the next handful of years. AI is all about data and how much data you have, and I'm sure that's what Stephen's getting at. So it'll be interesting to see to how the global enterprises, commerce, and nation states begin to interact. We've seen a little bit of it as has been referenced in Ukraine and even in the United States in some disaster recovery areas. But I think there will be other overlaps where there is access to progressive technology that may be able to allow or influence governments in some of their decision making in more kind of diplomatic ways. So I do think it's something that should be considered, should be kept an eye on. But in general, these big companies are the ones that will be making AI. They will be the ones that have the data to do it. And so they will be a part of not only geopolitics, but everyone's life. And I think it's probably pretty hard to to try to stop it at this point. I think it's just the way it's going to be.
Yeah, I concur with that. Well, hey, look, we're seeing it right now, y'all, right? We're watching the news every day. We're in the middle of a change of administration. We're not going to have a political conversation today as part of this discussion, but I will say it's interesting to see ideas where administrations are teaming with industry instead of running from that conversation. Now, why they're teaming, jury's out. Is it about, it could be about an individual or it could be about a government, but I don't think it's a bad thing to see industry and government teaming when there's power to be gained on the back end of it. So enter some of the conversations that we're seeing about what's currently going on with new administration change. And 4 years from now, we'll likely have a similar conversation with the new administration that's going to happen 4 years from now. And I think it's a good thing. It's a healthy thing for in the United States for industry and government to team together where there's power to be gained by it versus the other way around.
Thank you so much. We had one other comment to the panelists by one of the students who strongly recommends other programs like Microsoft Student Learn Ambassador as being a great supplement to academic training for AI and ML. And also, both she and I have been involved in Google Cloud. And for example, Google has a ambassadors, women tech makers group that you can apply to become part of that. And I just have amazing amount of resources for that. Workshops, multi-day workshops in learning a lot of different tools in computing.
Does anybody in the room have a question, Jill? Do we have any more online? If not, we have one in the room.
No, that's it for the questions online, unless I miss one. I think that's it.
Jen, I'll add to that. It's just great to see that kind of activity. That's outside the classroom. That to me is extracurricular. That's not something that you're doing inside of a curricular plan that says you do or don't get something on your diploma. So anything that you can do, especially with those things that are industry based, so what I'm looking at is Microsoft and some of the work that's being done with Google. I mean, I get it, they're working with education, but those are extracurricular activities that are awesome. And so highly encourage you to continue to do those things. Well done.
Yeah, we do have a question in the room.
Yeah, hi, thank you all for taking the time today. You both touched on this a little bit earlier, which is the use of social media location data and the use of AI models, but I think any other location data as it relates to private citizens would also relate here. So I'm interested in what kind of groups are interested in this information. Who is this information available to, and do you have any ethical or security related concerns about the availability of this data?
Yeah, that was a thesis topic of mine 10 years ago. So certainly, and I think that it's gotten better over time. It's become something that is more secure and less available. However, it's a simple pay to play today. And those companies that are willing to buy the data from these big corporations that we're talking about have access to all the location data they want from individuals. You're walking around with a location device in your pocket today, and any marketing agency that has enough money can go buy that data stream and target you directly as you walk around. So it's out there. It's expensive. I do think it's something that I wish I could influence more, and I wish I could educate more people on the privacy concerns that we all should have with this. At the same time, I'm a big consumer of technology, and I have that same device in my pocket, and I don't turn off the location services. So, I'm kind of speaking out of both sides of my mouth. But yeah, absolutely, I think it's a relevant topic. I think it's one that needs more research. It needs to be communicated more heavily, and people need to understand the privacy constraints that are out there.
Yeah, I concur. I would also say that so ignorance is not an excuse. You as the consumer or the user of the device, you have a lot to say about that, about what you turn on location services for and what you don't. It's obvious when you download many applications that you're given that as an option to choose yes or no, and many folks just blast through as many buttons as they can to make the app work. I would encourage all of us to continue to look at what we've turned on and what we've turned off, and protecting ourselves, because there's certain apps that have no business knowing where I'm at with location services. And I will say this, though, that I don't know, there are obviously some creeps out there that are using it for creepy things, but I think most of the data is not being used to find out what's going on with the individual. It's being used to find out what's going on with groups of individuals. It's creating a view of anonymous collections of people in order to be able to make decisions, business decisions about where things are either built or where things are moved or how supply and demand is met. But certainly the data can be very scary, and I think we each have personal responsibilities as well in managing what those, access to our data is.
Thank you. Thank you.
Anybody else in the room would like to pose a question to our esteemed panelists?
So something that you guys touched on earlier was that with the use of AI and its iterations, there's this large draw of compute and therefore electricity, and there's maybe some scarcity coming into play with how quickly it's being bought up and new servers needing to be made to meet the requirements of this emerging industry. How do you guys see that playing out with the rate that it's expanding? And like, do you see it outpacing our current amount of compute, our current amount of electricity, and how does that affect us?
Yeah, I think we're going to run out of energy before we run out of compute, would be my statement there. I think the compute we're talking about is different than what we use for our cell phones and our laptops, although I expect our laptops and cell phones will evolve a little bit. But I do expect on the energy side for us to hit some constraints. Businesses, enterprises, industries are aware of this. They're trying to react. You'll see there's new forms or different use cases of old forms of energy creation that are being implemented, including these salt reactors that seem to have a lot of promise in data center uses. So it's going to have an impact. I don't think it's gonna take over, turn off the energy for a portion of even California, but I do think it will impact the price of energy. I think it'll have huge demand implications, and I think it's going to really push R&D on the energy side to make sure that we have the energy to allow for the progress of this technology.
Yeah, I concur with everything said. And there obviously is a wild card, and that is there a new form of energy, or is there another version of how we're going to create and manage energy moving forward that may or may not be connected to the traditional fossil fuel use of energy and how we see it today. None of us have the glass ball, but we'll see how that plays out. But I do agree that right now the answer would be we'd run out of energy before we run out of compute power.
Thank you.
Anybody else? Any other questions online? Does anybody else in our online audience, any last questions or comments?
I could ask a follow-up to my previous
Oh, okay,
question.
we have a follow-up in the room, and then I am gonna allow a couple minutes because I'm gonna ask our panelists to stay on while we get the folks in the room for a photo. But I gotta have a photo on. Go ahead. Willis, yeah, follow up.
Yeah, so I guess I'm interested in why perhaps the government hasn't been quicker to regulate the gathering and sale and use of all of this data. Do you think we need more regulations, and what would those look like?
There's a lot to unpack there. I would say the answer in probably short is that there's a lot of money to be made with that data, and when there's money to be made, there's influence, and the concern around our data has been something that I think it has been around for a long time, 10, 15, 20 years even. And the reality is even those of us that are concerned about it are not willing to give up the technology to stop it. And so while it's something that I wish people were more aware of so that they could not claim ignorance and that they could be more proactive in protecting themselves, I don't know that even I would give up some of the positives that come from me giving up that location data just for the sake of privacy. So should there be something done about it? Yes. I don't know what that is though.
I concur. I would say there's other countries that do data collection and data use differently, and we kind of know what the alternatives are. I choose the model we're in, kind of the freedom to succeed and the freedom to fail, versus something that's straight down the middle that the government controls all of it. So there are pros and cons to both. I've seen both and listened to the conversations on both sides of the fence. I choose the one that we're in right now.
Thank you.
There is one more question that just popped into the from Philip in the webinar, is about cloud in general and how essential cloud is for AI.
I can take that one. I'll tell you, I don't have any physical servers anymore. Those have been gone for a few years. There is an economic value in having your own data center, but with the elasticity of demand for at least what I do, everything is in the cloud. I have a laptop, I have my cell phone, every other form of compute is in the cloud for us. Anything we build for our customers is in the cloud. And I think that continues to be a trend that we will only see more of. There is need to have some of these systems off net, especially inside of the intelligence space. But I think if you're not at least understanding the cloud and learning to apply what you've picked up to the cloud, you're doing yourself a disservice. So certainly allow that to be part of your own research and development. Make sure you're contributing to, learning the progression of the cloud and how you use it.
Thank you so much. So we need to wrap up now. I would like to show just a couple of slides with contact information, and then Steve, if you can stay, we want to take a photo. So we just wanted to share here the Spatial Sciences Institute, for those who are outside our institute, is almost up to our 15-year anniversary with 18 academic programs. And if you'd like to take a screenshot of this, who to contact if you're interested about any of our programs, there's Chaz Burnett, Monica Pan, Jocelyn Ward, and of course the registrar's page. And of course you can reach out to any of the folks who helped organize this. We're 3 clusters help organize this, so it's kind of across the board. And we can always provide all our contact information with the link to this when it's available. It's a link to this recording.
So first, a round of applause for our.
Yay! Thank you.